Hi and welcome back to my art and fiction channel. Today I'm going to be reading you a short story called Old World Magic, and this one was published quite a few years ago now in this anthology, which was titled Ruins Metropolis. It was published by Hadley Rille Books. I'll leave a link down below for you, so if you wish to you can pick up your own copy. It features a whole pile of writers. Some you won't have heard of, some you certainly will have done. Great read. Highly recommended. So, onwards. Old World Magic. Those new runes I bought from here are lovely. Do you remember the set I mean? Each rune is carved onto a flat oblong of smooth cedar wood with rounded corners. They came in a green velvet pouch with a silky drawstring. Janet smiled politely. Yes, I remember. I'm pleased you like them. Actually, she could hardly forget. The woman standing before the sales counter was one of the most annoying customers Janet had to endure. When she had chosen the set, she spread them all out on the glass counter and then, in turn, held each rune between her thumb and index finger until she had been certain that each had been imbued with mystic force. Janet hadn't the heart to tell the silly woman she was feeling her own thumb's pulse. Janet said, "Have you learned to read them yet?" "Not yet," Tracy scowled. "I've been going through the books I bought from here, but one author says one thing and another says something else. Which do I believe?" Maybe the contradictions are due to an author's personal perception of how to read runes. Perhaps you need to study as many books as you can, then work with the runes by yourself for a while, and so gradually arrive at your own understanding of them. Janet eased her position on the crooked stool behind the counter. The purple wall felt cold against her shoulders. "Okay, have you got more books then?" Tracy walked excitedly towards the bookshelves, but instantly became distracted by a glass case that displayed numerous sets of tarot cards. "Oh, they look nice. I feel really drawn to them. Maybe it's a sign. Runes might not be for me, which is why tarot might be just the thing. How do I choose which pack to go for?" Janet tried not to sigh, but Tracy did readily spend considerable sums of money, and Janet could not afford to offend regular customers. Tracy reminded her of a child in a sweet shop, whose greedy eyes flitted from one brightly coloured delight to the next. As the owner of this cluttered shop, however, Janet recognised the pragmatic necessity of enticing Tracy to part with money. Fortunately, the colourful displays of crystals and New Age bric-a-brac had proven sufficiently tempting. Tracy gazed at the boxed tarot sets, tapping the tip of one finger on her chin. Her expensive tooled leather shoulder bag was a memento of her recent trip to Portugal. The white coat was from Paris, and the grey suit had been bought in Milan. Daddy's business acumen had encased Tracy in a comfortable world where her every passing whim could be accommodated. Daddy still looked after her, even though Tracy was in her late 20s. Her days were her own to fill as she pleased, and her current pleasure was the ardent pursuit of all things mystical. At least this meant that she spent lots of money in Janet's small New Age shop. Oh, which should I choose? I keep feeling drawn to the Egyptian style pack. Does it come with a book? No, but there are several how-to guides on the bookshelf. Janet thought about the delicious-looking chicken salad sandwich sitting in a paper bag under the sales counter. Coffee would be welcome too. "Wonderful," said Tracy, smiling broadly. "Okay, I'll have the Egyptian tarot, because the Egyptians were really magical and clever." While Janet moved to unlock the display case and lift out the chosen pack of divination cards, Tracy went to the bookshelves and began combing titles. She quickly chose 3 brightly coloured, heavily illustrated books, then put these on the sales counter beside the opal bracelet, 22-inch statuette of a fantasy wizard, and the 6 packets of elven mist incense which she'd already picked out. After Tracy had paid for her goods, she set her shoulder bag on the counter and unzipped it. "I'd like to give you something." Janet's stomach rumbled, but she smiled with polite interest. "Oh?" From inside her bag, Tracy pulled out a framed watercolour painting of a fairy hovering above a rose. "This is for you, a token of my gratitude for being so helpful." "For me? That is so kind of you. I really didn't expect." Janet gazed in mingled pleasure and amusement at the purple-clad fairy's squinting eyes and misshapen limbs. The rose looked rather like a squashed pink and yellow cabbage, speared on a greenish-brown plank. Tracy beamed happily. "Don't give it another thought. I'm always painting fairies. Anyway, I must be going now. Oh, that spell book I bought from here is really good. I'm going to try a spell for swimming with selkies." Janet looked up from the childish painting. "Be careful. Every year people drown around here." "Do you believe selkies exist?" Tracy picked up the white plastic carrier bag containing her purchases. "Do you think it's really possible for seals to change into human shape and back again?" Janet tried not to giggle at Tracy's entirely serious expression. She said, "Who knows? Local folklore says that it's so. Certainly the Dee estuary is notorious for drownings. Best play it safe, hey? I'd leave the selkies well alone if I were you." The last thing she needed was newspaper headlines screaming, "New Age shop sends customer to drown." She attracted more than enough hassle from self-righteous bigots as it was. "Perhaps you're right about the selkies," said Tracy, clearly disappointed. "Still, there are plenty of other spells in that book that I could try." "I'm sure there are." Janet forced her eyes not to look at the sandwich. In doing so, she noticed that the rack of hand-dipped candles needed straightening. "Oh well, I must be off. I'll pop in again soon." Tracy waved goodbye and walked from Janet's shop. She liked Janet, but thought she might be a bit more enthusiastic about the wonderful things she sold. Anyone might assume that Janet didn't entirely believe in her own products. Tracy contentedly walked along the main village road, then headed down a side street lined with old trees shading 3-storey Georgian houses. Daddy had converted the top floor of theirs into a self-contained flat for her, while he and Mummy still lived downstairs. She could see the Dee estuary from a living-room window, and had trained a powerful telescope onto distant West Hoyle sandbank which lay beyond Hilbury Island. The large herd of common and Atlantic grey seals spent most of their time sunbathing there. She had watched them carefully for hours. So far, she hadn't noticed any of them change shape. Perhaps they only did this at night so no one could witness them. Tracy liked her room. She had chosen the green and lilac colour scheme herself. She'd covered the walls with her own fairy paintings. People were jealous of her skills as an artist. In fact, the woman who owned a local art shop had refused to exhibit any of Tracy's paintings because they would look too good next to her own boring landscapes. After she had made herself a cup of tea, Tracy sat on the fluffy cream rug in her living room and opened up the pack of tarot cards. She placed the how-to books at her side so she would be able to look up the meanings. She did not need to ponder over what to ask the cards as she clumsily shuffled them. "Okay," she said to herself, "when will I get a boyfriend?" She tried for over an hour to understand the reading. Although each card was given several meanings in the book, they didn't seem to make much sense when read in sequence. Tracy scowled. Perhaps she bought the wrong set of cards. Never mind, there were plenty more in the shop. Or maybe the tarot cards needed a more magical setting to work. She really liked that idea. It felt just right. She decided to walk to Caldy Hill, so she leisurely changed into last season's jeans and pulled on her new designer walking boots. Her amber velvet lace top was from a tiny boutique in Chester that specialised in witchy attire. Tracy thought it appropriate to dress the part. While Janet had advised her to leave the Selkies alone, she had said nothing about the fairies on Caldy Hill. Few people believed in their existence anymore, but old Wirral folk tales claimed Caldy Hill is hollow, and that fairies lived within. People had disappeared without a trace, though some blamed that on the black triangular UFOs that had been seen zooming up from beneath the River Mersey. Caldy Hill was lovely, with the russet and amber shades of autumn gowning the ancient woodland. The air smelled of damp earth and dying vegetation and carried a briny tang from the shining sea. On the summit stretched purple heathery moor, and thoughtfully sited benches offered restful views over West Kirby village to the River Dee, with the green pastures of Wales on the opposite bank. From the nearby mouth of the estuary, the Dee poured into the treacherous Irish Sea. Tracy knew where she was heading. Tucked away between the trees was a pond so shaded that the water seemed akin to wet ink. Beside this grew an old, gnarled oak tree. Folklore insisted that this was a fairy tree. Small gifts were often left at its base or in its branches. If a fairy liked your gift, it might grant you your wish. If it disliked your gift, you'd find yourself in serious trouble. These were not the tiny, dainty, sparkly fairies which might be bought as an ornament in a New Age shop. These fairies were the real McCoy, ancient, devious and powerful. Tracy remembered all this as she sat down on a fallen tree trunk and pondered how best to proceed. Maybe she should have waited to try this until she had learned to read the cards properly, but decided she might as well proceed. She pulled out a lacy gypsy shawl from her shoulder bag and spread this on the woodland floor, using big chunks of rose quartz crystal to weigh down the corners. She knew better than to light any incense here. The local bylaws forbade fires of any kind to protect the woodland. Instead, she took a perfume spray bottle from her bag and generously squirted this around. The air now smelled of sweet musk as well as mouldy leaves and mud. Then she shuffled her new tarot pack and spread out the cards according to the diagram in one book. Certainly she felt different this time. Perhaps it was the inherent magic of Caldy Hill. She sat back on her heels, frowned, and diligently turned over the first two cards. "Well, it's a pleasant day for it," said a male voice nearby. Tracy looked up to see a very tall, slender man. He was leaning against the fairy tree, but he was dressed like any ordinary hiker, with a green waterproof jacket and stout boots. A long blonde ponytail snaked from beneath his brown woolen hat. "What do you want?" she said defensively. She felt a little apprehensive talking to an unknown man in a secluded corner of the woods. "Just passing the time of day, that's all." He shrugged disinterestedly, but made no move to move on. "Well, I'm busy," she said, realising that he was actually rather good-looking in a rugged, outdoorsy way. His clothes were old, so he probably didn't have much money. Tracy dismissed all further interest. "Which cards have you turned over?" He prodded at the ground with his hawthorn walking stick. Why, can you read tarot cards? The scorn in her voice was plain. Actually, she had turned over the Fool and the Nine of Swords, but didn't see how this was any of his business. My mother can. Really? How nice for her. Do you always speak so rudely to people? He seemed to be silently laughing. She sniffed contemptuously. I don't even know you. I'm trying to do something here and you just butted in. Ah, I see. Well, actually, you're trespassing on my property. You don't own Caldy Hill. No. No, so get lost, okay? Tracy glared angrily at the smirking stranger. She began gathering up her cards, having promptly decided to move elsewhere, away from this weirdo. The man was still laughing aloud, still leaning against the tree trunk. You're a lousy excuse of a witch, for sure. She pouted without intending to. Well, I'm just learning. He smiled and quizzically cocked his head to one side. Don't you wish you could have lessons? I wish. She plunged the shawl back into a bag with the tarot cards and the crystals, then prepared to walk away. The man smiled and casually waved one hand. Beside the fairy tree, a door opened. Its frame was formed from leaves and branches, and it shimmered slightly in the increasingly frosty air. Tracy stared fixedly at the door. She could only see darkness beyond it. Permit me, said the man, snapping his fingers. Instantly, torches burst into flame, illuminating a long corridor lined with thick stone columns that rose between the stone floor and a high ceiling thickly gowned in shadows. Each ancient column was elaborately decorated with painted symbols that Tracy had never seen before. The style looked similar to Egyptian, but the pictorial language was not the same. When she hesitated on the threshold, he smiled charmingly and said, "Be my guest," and politely offered her a guiding hand into the darkness. As she stepped into the corridor, the warmth of his strong, steady palm sent a pleasurable shiver through her, but she determinedly ignored this. Mummy had always insisted that a marriage to a pauper, no matter how handsome he might be, was a fool's choice. The air inside this mysterious place smelled stale and musty, like a room that had been kept closed for too long. Many of the massive painted columns were in poor repair, and some had already collapsed. The creamy marble floor was strewn with fallen masonry, and she had to be careful how she proceeded. What folly had allowed this fabulous place to slide into such decay, she wondered. Yet where was she? The corridor seemed to go on forever, and as her eyes steadily adjusted to the embracing darkness, Tracy realised that the corridor was actually just an illuminated passage through a vast hall that extended into ravenous shadows on all sides of her. Carefully picking through the rubble, she walked to the centre of this passage, formed of flickering torchlight, towards a small raised pool. A slender chink of sunlight fell from a fissure in the ceiling to sparkle on its shimmering fountain. When she peered over the low retaining wall, Tracy realised that this was an immeasurably deep well. On the rough stone sat 2 golden goblets beside an elegant carafe of red wine. The man began to pour the wine. Tracy had not noticed him enter the hall in front of her. Perhaps it had been a trick of the shadows. The immensity of the decaying hall could only inspire awe. This place felt like the most ancient of majestic temples. The very air seemed heavy with antique magic and the mysteries of a forgotten race. "A toast to our acquaintance," suggested the man, offering her a goblet. The gracefulness of his gesture seemed at odds with his rough clothing. This hiker had the deportment of a prince. She was so thirsty she had not noticed this before. Tracy took a sip of the delicious wine. "I don't even know your name." He smiled. "I have used many names over time. You, however, may call me Sir." "Pardon?" Tracy stared at him, her bewilderment flaring into alarm. "You heard me perfectly." He set down his untouched goblet. The door closed. She determinedly put down the goblet and turned to march back to the entrance. There was no trace of any door, only an endless hall gowned in ebony shadows. The man began laughing. Tracy sprinted to where she thought the door had been, but there seemed no limit to this place. She ran, stumbling over fallen masonry, the decaying painted columns looming out of the darkness like ghosts. Her breath was laboured, and perspiration lined her forehead and soaked her back. But she could find no walls to define the boundaries of this place. She wept and screamed, trying to deny the reality of her own experience. If you were hoping to wake in your own familiar bed, as if from a bad dream, then I must disillusion you. The man was leaning against a pillar nearby. He looked completely relaxed. He was studying her like a scientist might observe a lab rat in a maze. "Let me out! I demand that you open that door!" He shrugged and smirked. "You wished for lessons. You didn't specify what you wished to learn." Am I what you people so glibly call a fairy?" "Yes, you might say that." "It's all in my head. It has to be. You can't be real." Tracy's throat like it couldn't draw in enough air. Adrenaline surged through her. "If I'm not real, then neither is this place, and even you can grasp that it is so." The man began walking away down the corridor of light. He snapped his fingers, and instantly her expensive clothes were transformed into a simple brown servant's dress with a plunging neckline. Her boots shrank to become flat sandals. A thin brown shawl appeared on her head, and a fashionable tulle leather shoulder bag turned into a triangular silver-plated brush on a heavy chain around her neck. It was bordered with runes formed from fragmented rose quartz crystal and decorated with two images from her tarot pack, the Hanged Man and the Magus. If only she had taken the time to learn to read these properly. "What have you done to me?" she screamed, pulling at the coarse fabric. The cold air was already raising goosebumps on her bare arms. "You wished for lessons? You will have them. But first you must use your brush to collect all these fallen stones and set each piece in its correct place to rebuild the columns." "Don't be ridiculous!" Tracy looked around the darkening room in despair. As the stranger walked away, the torches quickly winked out. "It'll take me forever in the dark." "Indeed. Enjoy eternity, my dear." And then he walked away. Well, if you enjoyed that little story, leave me a comment below and click on like. And in the corner there, you'll find a little subscribe button. And if you click on that, you won't miss any of my future videos, which will be coming out every Thursday about 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock British time, that is. Thanks for listening.